Come on, let's get going.
Have you brought Dorothea with you?
Have you seen Dorothea lately?
Let's start with the life of the man who is the namesake for this experiment. Philip Aylesford was a man who lived through the 1600s at the time of Oliver Cromwell, from around April 25, 1599 to the 3rd of September 1658. Philip Aylesford was born in England in 1624 and served in the military throughout his young adulthood and was subsequently knighted at 16, where the parliamentarians and royalists went to war over issues of England's governance and record of religious freedom. This is where he would meet and become a close friend to Charles II, King of Scotland. Unfortunately for Philip, he would not get to see Charles rule for long. Philip was a man who had a good amount of money to live off of. He was a Catholic Englishman aristocrat that lived in Diddington Manor. In his life, one of his accomplishments is his marriage with a noble woman named Dorothea, who was described as beautiful but cold. On a random day of Philip's life, he would just be riding around when he came upon a gypsy encampment. It was on this excursion towards the edge of his estate he would meet another woman named Margot, a girl with raven hair. Immediately smitten with this woman, Philip would take her to the gatehouse of his manor. He would hide this relationship from his wife, but he could not keep hiding it forever. Somehow, Dorothea would find out about the strange trips Philip took to the gatehouse, and this would lead her to eventually discover Margot. Dorothea, in shock and rage of finding Margot in the gatehouse, would end up accusing Margot of using witchcraft in order to steal her husband. Out of fear of losing everything that Philip had owned and worked to in his life, he would let the woman he was having love with die via burning at the stake. This would leave Philip full of remorse, as he did not do a single thing to defend Margot in the trial for her life, and with a single sentence, he could have saved her life. All he had to do was be honest with the court. Philip's sins would haunt his every waking moment. This would be the downfall of Philip, as his life would now turn into constant regret for his inaction at the trial for Margot's life. The regret would boil over until one day, in agony and remorse, Philip would throw himself from the battlements of Diddington Manor. This is where Philip's life ends, but his journey in the afterlife begins. Let's move roughly about 300 years into the future, to the month of September 1972. Then, a group of 8 people would try to communicate with the spirit of a man known as Philip. The group of 8 people are attended by Dr. Alan George Owen, aka A.R.G. Owen. The group of 8 were all members of the Toronto Society for Cyclical Research, TSPR. The group was made up of Al, a heating engineer, Lorne, an industrial engineer, Andy, Lorne's wife, who was into astronomy and was very artistic, Bernice, an accountant, Dorothy, a housewife who also did accounting and bookkeeping on the side, Sydney, a salesman on break studying sociology, and the youngest of the group, Sue, the chairman for the Canadian chapter of Mensa. If you don't know what Mensa is the largest and oldest high IQ society in the world. It is a non-profit organization open to people who score at the 98th percentile or higher on a standard supervised IQ or other approved intelligence test. Lastly, the already mentioned Iris, who co-funded the TSPR. She also did some nursing, social work, and wrote a book on the conjuring up of Philip, which is where we learn a great deal about the TSRP and contacting Philip. Hey guys, future editing Omar. I see that I said TSRP. What I meant to say was TSPR. Just making that correction here so you guys later know. There's also like little annotations that I put in the video. And Iris was also the director of the New Horizons Research Foundation, which was meant to promote research on the frontiers of science and disseminate information. By the way, this all happened in Toronto, Canada. The experiments would actually start by all members sitting in a circle around a drawn picture of Philip, which was drawn by Andy, and they all try to focus on him and his life in order to manifest some sort of reaction from the ghost. And despite all members doing this for about a year, and it getting easier for them to visualize Philip, this would lead to fruitless results. Then, when Iris would be looking for a better medium of contact, she would run into the psychic research of C. Brooks Smith, D.W. Hunt, and K.J. Batcheldor, and how they conducted seance-like experiments to see psychic ability. Iris would follow suit. she would change the way the experiment was handled. In this new format, no longer was it quiet meditation in a circle. Rather, it was now an open and jolly environment that was brightly lit. It would be 3 to 4 sessions after that the group would finally have an encounter with Philip. Supposedly at first, it was a tap too light to hear, but was felt on top of the table. But then gradually, the tap would become louder, and more tapping would occur, to the point the tapping even supposedly became the table sliding. Dorothy would exclaim, "I wonder if Philip is doing this." Then a loud tap would be heard after this question. Finally, contact with Philip had occurred. Side note, I've been saying taps instead of raps this entire time, but there really isn't a difference between a rap and a tap. It's just a rap is when tapping comes from no apparent source. But I'm still gonna say that Philip tapped, because everyone knows what that means. But he technically rapped, so yeah. 1 tap would mean yes, and 2 would be no. This was one of the major ways that Philip would communicate with the team. When these conversations with Philip continued, manifestations would supposedly start to become more apparent. Although Philip never actually manifested, other manifestations did occur. It is said that colored lights appeared when talking with Philip, and the table was said to have been moved by an unseen force, presumably Philip. These movements are even said to have become far more elaborate instances of tilting and timing with rock music, sliding towards new people entering the room. Supposedly, the table would even levitate. More importantly though, were the communications with Philip described as conversations. These conversations aren't important for the reason you think they are. That is, if you are unaware of the Philip experiment. You see, all the answers Philip would give the group already knew. And more importantly, when Philip would give a historically inaccurate answer, the group wouldn't question it. Not because the group wanted so desperately to believe that they were communicating with Philip, but because the group only knew as much as Philip did. You see, there is something I've withheld so far. The real aim of the Philip experiment wasn't to see if communication with a ghost was possible. Strictly speaking, Philip wasn't a ghost, because Philip never existed. He was fictional. Philip Aylesford was never born in the 1600s. He never lived in Diddington Manor, never married a noblewoman named Dorothea, never had an affair with a gypsy named Margot, and more importantly, none of those people were ever born. The TSRP were aware. They were the ones who made up the story, hence why Philip only ever knew as much as they did. All inaccurate historical information came from them simply not knowing the real information. Well, now you're thinking, so this whole thing was one big hoax. The Philip experiment is just another group of people, desperate for attention, making up claims of seances with something and using a made-up story of a ghost. Well, actually no. If you were actually thinking, that's where I was going with this. You see, this was the actual point of the experiment. The true purpose of the Philip experiment was to create a fictional being and see if communication with it was possible. And well, remember, all those claims they had at their seances, well, let's just say word got out about the experiment, and soon people were curious, and soon the experiment would get recorded. It was, after all, the 1970s. Cameras did exist.
Have you seen Dorothea lately?
No.
No. Would you like to see Dorothea lately?
No.
No.
Didn't you love Dorothea in your time?
No. That was too...
A bit louder, Philip, please.
Yes, we need them louder.
Philip, do it louder.
Good louder.
Not much
Good
louder.
louder.
Philip, did you like Dorothea?
That's
Good.
Did you love
Margot.
Margot.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Say it again. Did you love Margot?
good?
Upside down, up in the air, to dear birds. When your feet planted firmly on the ground, up in the air, to dear birds. Come on, up in the air and upside down.
Hello, are you still there?
Oh, there was one.
He loves his beer, perhaps.
Why don't you
Philip, if you perform, you shall have a nice big pint of beer. Would you like that? Good.
Now, that was the loudest rap of the evening.
Yes, he loves beer. He loves
Well,
beer.
keep on that vein then.
Would you like 2 bottles of beer?
Oh, the circulation.
Yes. A little bit louder. A little louder than that. Let Alan hear that you want 2
Come
bottles
on, Philip.
He's
Let me
going to
hear
buy
you.
it.
Let me hear you.
There.
Yeah?
There's a rap.
There.
Now, all hands are visible. Let's just dwell on this point. All hands are visible at this point, yet the raps are clearly coming from, it would appear, certainly from within that table. Let's try it again. Philip, give us a good, loud, clear rap.
For 1 bottle of beer. Louder than that.
Come on, louder, Philip.
Louder for 2.
Come on, Philip.
Philip, if you want a bottle of beer, rap loudly.
That was...
Louder, Philip?
Come on, Philip, louder. Here comes the microphone.
It has to be louder, Alan won't buy it.
Come on, Philip.
Come on.
What?
Right,
I didn't hear
right
you.
under the microphone, Philip.
Right here, Phil. Right here.
Keep your
Right
hands
here.
up.
No, he's doing it over
Come
in
on,
that corner.
come on,
He's over
Philip,
in that corner.
louder
Come
and
on,
louder.
Philip. Louder.
That's better. Oh, good for you, Philip. You
All right.
have your bottle.
It is even claimed that some of this activity you just witnessed followed the TSRP members home. Okay, so a fake ghost has been communicating with the TSRP. This isn't really an experiment though if you can't replicate it. You know, you need to observe, hypothesize, experiment the report, then replicate. The TSRP would repeat the experiment 5 weeks later with Lilith, a French-Canadian spy, and soon many more would also communicate with this group in different experiments. It wasn't just the TSRP that would try to replicate this experiment. In Sydney, Australia, a group of 6 people created the Skippy experiment, in which a 14-year-old named Skippy Cartman died. A tragic tale of a young naive girl who fell in love with a Catholic school teacher named Brother Monk, started an affair with him, got pregnant, and then when telling Brother Monk, expecting him to marry her or some other happy ending, ends up getting strangled to death by Brother Monk, and he hides her body and runs away to a new town, without people ever finding out what happened to Skippy and why she disappeared. The idea of an extremely messed up and graphic tale follows both Philip and Skippy, and that's for a reason. The idea is that you give these ghosts tragic tales to make their invocations stronger. Supposedly, the Skippy crew did get raps, but not much else, and I couldn't find any other evidence than their claims. Let me start out by saying that if you believe that they're doing this with psychic energy / psychokinetic energy, vril, I don't know what people call it, but none of the participants of the Philip experiment ever claimed to have any. And that was kind of the whole point, to see if this could be done with regular people. One thing you see a lot when researching this topic is the idea that this could be a tulpa, which is an idea in theosophy, although it's regarded as a concept of Tibetan Buddhism, that a person, a tulpomancer, yeah, really, their thoughts / psychoenergy can create a living thought form, which would eventually manifest itself in reality. Maybe, not really. It all depends on the tulpa, you see. It's your energy, but it's a being with its own free will. Funny side note, the Tulpa Wikipedia Tulpomancer subsection has some, well, it's stuff I was already aware about when it comes to the people who call themselves Tulpomancers, but I wasn't aware that anyone would care enough to actually document this strange stuff. There are 3 issues with the Tulpa theory. 1. A Tulpa is a one-person thing. This was a group experiment. Secondly, Philip never manifested in anyone's mind or in person. There was supposedly smoke, but again, Philip never manifested. Third, Philip answered and responded the way the group expected / created him to answer. So it would go the reason that Philip did not have its own free will in a way, so he couldn't be his own being. The last paranormal answer left is one that we all would have guessed by now. A demon, or an equivalence of whatever you guys believe. I mean, it didn't respond till they did seances. And anyone who has ever seen a horror movie or heard a priest already knows that that allows them to attach to you and respond to you. And of course, they lie and take whatever form you give them, because they want to feed off the attention you give them. And you know, for that you will be damned to hell for all eternity. Yeah. I mean, there is also the possibility that someone in the group is lying. I mean, it only takes one group to fake some knocks. They don't have to let the rest know, so they actually believe it. And after all, sleight of hand tricks do exist. None of these are answers, rather just possibilities for who was knocking. To be fair, I've heard that this experiment is highly reproducible, so it makes the hoax angle all the less believable. The Philip experiment has not been legitimized by the scientific community. It was unfortunately scrutinized for confirmation bias. But at the same time, is this experiment enough to invoke a demon? Can a tulpa exist within the minds of many? Or maybe there is a little psychic energy in all of us, and this experiment just allows it to show itself. I don't know, but I do know that something tapped/rapped/knocked on a table in front of a group of 8 people and a camera crew in Toronto, Canada in the early 70s. And it couldn't have been Philip.
Philip, did you like Dorothea?